on this computer. All right, Gaia.
Hello, how are you, Erin?
Good. I am good. I've invited you here today for a bit of an interview and some storytelling time. And before we jump into what we're going to be hearing about from you, I would like to know if there's anything you want to say to introduce yourself. Who are you? What you doing here?
Well, my name is Gaia, and you and I know each other from years ago when you were in some of my trainings. The topic I've been asked to share about is breathwork. I've been doing breathwork since about 2004 with people in the holotropic sense and been working with pranayama for a good 25, 30 years. So, um, yeah, I have that to offer in the frame of this. I do a lot of other things, but I think that's the most important part to share right now.
Awesome. Gaia is also founder of Inanita, which is an incredible community. That's where you're at right now.
I'm at Inanita on the side of the volcano. Actually, if you look over my right shoulder over here, that's an ancient snake rock carving.
Oh, awesome. Wow. So you have the snake carvings with us as well. I'm going to keep
Yeah.
looking at that throughout this call.
Yeah.
Awesome. So as of this, I wanted to learn a little bit more about you, about breath. And the first kind of question I'm curious to hear from you, your take on and your experience in breath as a gateway to transformation.
Okay. So I think you gave me a little bit of information beforehand about some of the questions you might ask me, and I think the yogi answer is the best answer. If you study yoga philosophy, there's they talk about the different levels of our embodiment. So our physical embodiment, our mental embodiment, um, our more energetic field. And one of these bodies that they talk about is the pranic body, which is the body of breath or life force energy. And it's said by the yogis that the breath is actually the bridge between the body and the mind. So in this modern day of all this body mind science, breath sits right in the heart of it. We can really have an incredibly strong effect on our physiological system through changing our patterns of breath. And so as we work with breath, we can also begin to touch the emotional content that might be stored in our physical bodies from the way that our mind was unable to process things that arose in our life. And we can also bring more energy to ourselves. We can reduce anxiety. There are a lot of ways we can use the breath to manage our day to day as well as heal the past.
Wow. So yeah, big overarching themes. But I want to touch more on heal the past, because that seems to be something that comes up a lot when people do rebirthing, which is another name for certain breath
Yeah,
work.
it's one of the kind of family of circular breathing that we can go deeper into. Yeah.
Yeah, totally. Maybe something I'd kind of be curious to hear about from you are places where you saw that simply through breath work, participants of workshops or people who have actually taken this on as part of their life have been able to create substantial changes or really go through certain portals that maybe through classic channels of psychological support or reading that would not have been possible. So where breath actually created a connection or created an opening to seeing things that weren't there before.
Wow. It would be hard to pick a particular story. I see this on a regular basis. But in line with your question, at one point, let's come back though to the biology that's happening behind this circular breathing and holotropic breath work. Remind me to come back to that. I think it's a really important element. And it taps also into the modern frame, like trauma healing and all of that. In terms of personal stories or individual experiences, what I notice collectively right now is that personal growth, personal development, becoming more self-aware are things that have become really valued by the more popular culture. And it used to be a more alternative pursuit, and it's become quite a mainstream pursuit, which is really beautiful. Inside of that, we live inside of a very mental world. And since the days of the first sort of psychodynamic counseling with Freud, and maybe before, we began to really intellectualize the human experience as a part of the scientific process. And so a lot of people are getting information from magazines, getting information from teachers about what it is to be more self-evolved or self-aware or spiritual or whatever lingo people like to paste on it. And then we might bypass some of, because our mind understands something, we have this thought that it's resolved. Actually, over and over again, I see people who have a mental understanding of what's going on who still feel inordinately stuck. And through the breath and through the connection of the mind to the physical body, there's a liberation of life force energy that happens. And if the mind alone understands something, but the body cannot follow, we don't actually have a recipe for success. What we have is a recipe for frustration, because we have a mental understanding, and yet we have a being that somehow isn't prepared to step into the level of understanding that the mind has come to. So through liberating body armoring, which is how we swallow emotional content from the past, so coming back to your previous question, we lodge experiences in the body that we can't, maybe we didn't have the bandwidth, let's use the word bandwidth, to process in a moment. So it would have been anchored somewhere in our muscle tissue, the holding back. Let's say somebody really pisses you the fuck off at work and you need your job. You swallow. All of that swallowing stays stuck in our bodies. And then we wonder why our body will not follow the dictate of our mind, which is to do things a bit differently. It's because it's holding on to something from the past. The mind may have resolved it, but the body's not free yet. The breath work supports the body to liberate these things, and also supports us to have moments of clarity, the aha moments, I like to call them. Or the other thing that this kind of breath work does is it kind of breaks down those old patterns. And the only way to really create space for new patterns is by breaking down the old ones. It's like if you go the same way to work every day, and then suddenly you find a shortcut, that shortcut, you're probably going to keep using it. But until you built the track to the shortcut, you had no hope of getting there on the shortcut. Does that kind of make sense?
Totally.
Yeah.
It's me.
So this is the gift of the body: trapped emotions, trapped shit in the body, trapped muck, guck, emotions, frozenness, swallowing, all of that gets trapped in the body, and we get stuck. And breath helps us free us from being stuck. And what actually, I've learned this since you and I were working together. Me, I'm kind of a bit of a nerd, and my first thing is, my first litmus test is, does it work? And if it works, I'll use it. But then I want to understand it. It seems that circular patterns of breath, which is an open mouth breathing, which kind of looks like this, is akin to hyperventilation. What happens when we do that is we actually shut off elements of the frontal cortex, which is the part of the brain that does the human social functioning. So this is why at work I'm socially appropriate and I don't blow up, it's healthy. Yeah. Or if I stub my toe as I'm about to walk onto a podium to give a public speech, I won't scream out, ouch, fuck, that hurt. I'll be like trying to cover it and be all right. And all of those little things are things that the frontal cortex does that begin to control particular parts of our behavior so that we can live in a social context. When we sit or lie down and make this commitment to take these circular breaths, we basically shut that off. I mean, that's an oversimplification for you neuroscientists out there, but bear with me. It is a slight oversimplification, but for the sake of understanding, I think it works quite well. And inside of that, we gain the freedom to complete incomplete movements. That's a terminology from Peter Levine and the work of somatic experiencing. And so inside of this breath, with the frontal sort of cortex shut off and the access to more of our emotional content, we then liberate these things that are held inside of us. So that's effectively the short answer of how this holotropic or rebirthing or any kind of these circular breathing techniques, that's the basis that they're all fundamentally similarly constructed around.
Yeah. And something that I've noticed as you're speaking about the person who's experiencing this holotropic breathwork, what they might be going through, and what they might meet. And I want to kind of refocus the question on the person who's holding space So one thing is like what happens to so we're understanding more what happens inside on holotropic breath work or these circular breathings, but also what is the person who's holding space, even as an assistant, but especially as a facilitator, needs to know? And this is a big question, I know, right?
Yeah. But I mean, one of the first things that I focus on in my breathwork trainings with people is cultivating an attitude of what I refer to as back and down.
Mhm.
The back and down attitude is an attitude that is not merged with or what's the other meshed with
Mhm.
um, the person who is doing the breath work.
Mhm.
It's the state of being like a hollow bamboo. I am here and available to support this person on their journey, but it is not my responsibility to fix them or create a particular kind of experience. So I'm backed away from the person in an energetic way. I'm not inside of them. Yeah, I'm feeling back so I can be a healthy agent to support them. And I'm down in my seat. I'm grounded. I'm not jumping out to rescue or fix anyone. When people go through an emotional release process, each of us has emotions we are more or less comfortable with. And so when the other expresses an emotion that may be a little less comfortable for us, our tendency to either get involved to need to fix it. Like if somebody is grieving, I'm not good with grief. It's a tough one for me. And so when somebody's in grief, I have to be really conscientious to pull myself back and down. Or the other, I kind of like passion and I like anger. And so when somebody gets into a passionate kind of angry release, I might get overexcited and be in there kind of goading them on. And neither of those attitudes is backing down. Those are both in. The other thing that might happen is I might become dissociated. I might check out and become unpresent. So that's also not backing down because I'm not down. I'm out of my body somewhere. So that's the first thing, is that your presence as a facilitator, or the facilitator's presence, the person's experience and healing will be relative to the facilitator's capacity to stay back and down. I'll give you an example. If somebody goes into a kind of grieving situation and I coddle them and I hold their face and it's going to be okay, it's going to be okay. I actually haven't done anything but kind of do like symptom management, like a regular allopathic medicine would do. Rather, I allow them the space to know they're safe, to let go of these tears. And that requires me being centered, back, down, available, equanimous about their experience. So I'm not trying to push anything. I'm not sure what they need. I remain open, curious, and connected to the moment. That is number one. Quite possibly, I would say that's the number one thing to consider for the facilitator. As for the person who's doing the breath work, it's important that although it is not the facilitator's responsibility to create a particular kind of experience, it is the facilitator's responsibility to make sure this person feels safe and is safe. It is highly possible with this kind of breathing that people might have flashbacks or memories. Some of those memories may be very recognizable and let's call them real. And also some memories or flashes of awareness might be constructed by the mind based on the body's experience. Sometimes these experiences can be quite intense. Let's take a common, I'm sorry to have to say, a relatively common experience of some kind of sexual violation. The first one that came to mind actually is an incest case. So like a very severe situation where somebody's been through something very dark and very difficult to digest. The breathwork might bring up memories of this experience. Now, it is healthy for the person to come closer to the trauma, but only as close as they are able to hold without re-traumatizing. So the facilitator needs to understand tools for recognizing re-traumatization or things that might lead to staying stuck in particular patterns. which means that if anybody is really going deep, deep, deep into an emotional state, then they're staying stuck in one particular pattern and they're collapsing into it, so to speak. It's my role as the facilitator to presence them in the space.
Mm.
So to invite them to, if their eyes have been closed, and we'll talk about eyes in a minute, but if their eyes are closed, to immediately bring them back to an awareness that they're in a safe room.
Mm.
That may be enough for them to drop back in.
Mm. And
We've
maybe
never,
yeah. Yeah, before we go into maybe what the facilitator is doing, maybe another like double click on what is different in the way that the person who's doing the breath work, what shifts in their perception? What happens when you go into breath work? And I'm kind of aiming particularly like, can you hear words as they were said to you in a context when you're not in breath work? Do you understand cues the way you wouldn't? Because there's this perception change that happens. Like, what is it that happens when you are going into these breath works that changes from when you're not doing breath work, for example?
sorry, I don't quite understand your question.
All right, I'll put the first piece in and you'll know, like, for example, when someone's in breath work, if you speak to them with a normal tone and talk to them conversationally, they may not understand what you're saying. And so you need to change your tone and change the pace of your voice in order to, this is if you're going deep into certain states, yeah, of breath work. You look puzzled.
I am puzzled.
Mm-hmm.
I don't perceive that I change my tone.
Mm.
If somebody is in an emotional release experience that is quite strong,
Mm-hmm.
my regular tone would be to meet them with strength.
Mm-hmm.
You know, like,
Yeah.
huh?
That's something you do more automatically. I'm kind of breaking it down to people who maybe don't have the same basis of experience.
I hear you, but I don't, what I'm saying is I actually don't perceive that I am sure the tone is going to meet the moment, but there's no recipe for what tone to offer.
Yeah.
I can't offer a recipe for that. There are certain things in breath work. It is a type of work that is based in the depth of what you can offer in breath work. It will be based on, sure, you're learning, but your experience will teach you more than anything else. It is not the kind of work that ought to be done without having a lot of practice and experience, like offering, like if you're going to do a full holotropic or circular mouth breathing session, there are tools that you can use from that body of work, but
Mhm.
you need to be, trained and doing things, and that training can teach you how maybe your response might be nuanced.
Mhm.
But it's not like every time somebody has this kind of experience, the voice changes to that, or this kind of, it's a felt sense kind of body of work. It is not, it's a soft science. It's not a hard science. And
Mhm.
it can't be made into a hard science
Mhm.
because it's about human connection.
Can you go into that a little bit more? The human connection piece?
Well, by offering breath work in a way that is circular breathing, where there's an elevated sense of the sympathetic nervous system coming online, there's the potential for refacing trauma or things that we would call things that have been buried from the past. We're providing an opportunity for this person to connect with information and experiences that have been buried. So we are providing them an opportunity first to connect with themselves.
Mhm.
Then, as a human who is connected to their experience, we are in a relational frame with that person. We are not a session giving machine, but we're actually another person in the room who has their own relationship to their own emotional tapestry. They have their own things that are buried within them, and they have a unique individual type of personality that has to meet this person.
Mhm.
And so each individual really will, as a breathwork facilitator, practice and come to see the effect they have in that connection.
Mhm.
I would love to tell you, when this happens, always do this. When this happens, always do this. But if any, I'm a Tantra teacher. And one of the greatest things I ever heard about Tantra is, in Tantra, the answer is always, it depends.
Mhm.
Because Tantra is a relational framework.
Mhm.
We're in a relational frame.
Yeah.
So what I can tell you is that the thing that the facilitator needs to be watching out for are things like re-traumatization, things like being stuck in patterns, things like blocking particular energies that might be arising, and to support the person to break patterns, break through blocks, and also to keep themselves inside of a container that their nervous system is able to integrate. That's the role of the facilitator. It's pretty, what? Yeah, it's pretty basic. Bling. That is the role of the facilitator. My phone says it agrees.
So,
Yeah.
so
So I
I'm
can't really answer your question in the
totally.
way we, yeah.
And it's maybe not where we're going. I want to actually take it somewhere slightly else. So, for example, a lot of the breath work that you offer and other people offer are group sessions. Yeah. So this is often used as a modality in groups. And I'm just curious for you to hear about what the impact is when you're doing breath work, for example, on one-on-one, and what happens to a group field when you add modalities of breath. This might be many different answers, but
There's many
generally.
different answers here. Okay. So first of all, the first part of the question, sorry, there were two parts of the question. I
So
lost track of it.
yeah, just kind of noticing that a lot of times these,
The group versus individual. Okay, let me go there.
yeah.
So individual sessions and group sessions are, I think, equally represented in the breathwork world in terms of this circular breathing. And you're looking for more information about the group context.
Maybe I'll ask it differently. Kind of like why would we want to offer breath work in groups? What does that do? What does that give? What's the potential?
The first thing I want to say is breath. What we're talking about here right now, as I understand it, is circular connected breathing. That has a very specific answer, because there are other reasons that you might use other types of breath work in groups for other reasons. So I'm going to stay on this topic, but just make it clear that that's the topic I'm on, because there are other ways to use breath that we might explore later that are also great for groups. And yeah. On the collective, I mean, it's a really interesting thing. If people are in a breathwork session, most likely there's going to be some level of emotional release that happens in a group context. And inside of this group, groups in general provide the opportunity for individuals to see themselves inside of a container and to end or to support the ending of the idea of ego separation. So when I am on a breathwork mat and I'm the client and I'm pissed off and I'm letting go of the rage I had at somebody from my past that I was bottling up for a long time, I'm having that experience. Somebody next to me might be having the experience of bawling their eyes out over something, or somebody else might feel frozen, and somebody else, and different people are all having different experiences. We can feel and see and experience ourselves as something so much greater than what we are as an individual, because we recognize all these pieces. When we hear someone else, we also recognize that part of ourselves, or how we've related to people like that. And so it creates, all group work really creates a humanistic field in which we can maybe be less personalize our issues and make them into something that we understand as personal and yet collective at the same time. Also, for some people, other people's emotional expression feels very uncomfortable or unsafe. For example, anger in particular is one that brings a lot of people into resistance or fear. And having people helping people's nervous system to expand in a way that they can integrate the world as it is in a better way. So when somebody else is angry in the field, it's like, I know I can actually be around anger and it can be safe sometimes. That experience is very nourishing for the person. Sometimes it can happen that somebody in a group breathwork session will not be able to really have their own experience because the room is so alive that they're like freaking the fuck out. That's actually a session.
Yeah. Part
That's
of it.
actually a successful session if you can find a way for the person to move from what they call in somatic experiencing. I like the terminology. It's called the red vortex. So the
Mhm.
trauma vortex, if you can help somebody move from an inability to be in a particular experience that you know is safe. If you know it's safe, and that's another thing we can talk about, and that's yeah. But when you know someone is safe to be there and they aren't sure about it, and then they have that experience of being safe around somebody's lustful energy, for example, somebody might get a really horny kind of vibe, and then somebody feels really grunty in the room, and somebody's like freaking out because they had a really negative experience in the past where that was up for them.
Mhm.
And they may have a perpetual trigger of any kind of arousal, for example. Um, Allowing them to be in a space where those emotions are felt in a way that is not laid on them or not blamed or not painful or not a negative experience can support somebody's nervous system to integrate and expand, to contain more, or what's the word, they stay regular. The lingo nowadays is regulated, for somebody to stay regulated
Mhm. Yeah.
in a broader spectrum of experience.
Mhm. Actually,
So those are
circles
some of the
back.
benefits of a group. Huh?
That's excellent. It circles back to, we want to talk a little bit about the biology, the neurobiology of circular breath. Maybe
I
if you
kind of actually I did cover that, and I'll cover it again a
good.
little bit. This piece where we're cutting off the frontal cortex is the most interesting part to me.
Mhm.
Also, we're hyper oxygenating the blood, which seems to have the effect of kind of pushing at the muscle armoring from the inside out. I can give you an anecdote from my own experience actually about this. So
Mm.
I was, as a child, I was an extraordinarily overly trained, highly competitive gymnast, and then I was a yogi, and then I've done all sorts of pole dancing and acrobatics. My body's quite open,
Mm.
or was when I was younger. And for years, I did splits. I did put my legs behind my head, but I could not sit in a full lotus position, no matter what the heck I did. And I did the first training I did in tantric pulsation breathwork, which comes out of the Osho school. I um I did this 10-day training for breathwork facilitation. And during this breathwork training, we did holotropic sessions or open mouth breathing sessions every day for 10 days straight, like a full hour, hour and a half every day for 10 days, peeling back all these layers. And I hadn't thought about it. I mean, I saw the effect it had on my body. My eyes were bigger.
Mm.
Um, Parts of my cheeks were slightly different. There were like just things where my body looked subtly, but significant enough to notice different. And I go to this yoga class up in Chiang Mai. I'd been an Ashtanga practitioner. And I dropped into this Ashtanga class where obviously sitting in lotus is quite a strong part of it. And I just dropped into lotus position without effort. It was, for me, boggling. And I recognized in that moment that all of this breath work had been melting what I couldn't melt from the outside
Mm.
with all those years of trying and training. It just felt like my body wasn't built for that type of movement.
Mm.
When in fact, there must have been some emotional holding, some
Mm.
muscle tension that I was able to release with the breath work that I hadn't been able to release in any other way.
Mm.
So maybe that's a yeah, speak like I don't know that scientifically. I don't know how it works. I do know scientifically that this was mind blowing for me because I was like, oh my gosh, it's all the recognition that the frontal cortex gets shut off. I mean,
Mhm.
that's pretty, and also with a deep respect, because I think some of the breath work that's being offered today is being offered without enough training sometimes, or
Mm.
without enough transparency. Like I've just started doing this, or I don't have so much experience, or without doing a lot of practice sessions in advance. We're all quick, we all live in this fast go society. It's not a judgment, but I just noticed that's happening.
Yeah, totally. And very important to also put into context of this conversation that this is a general overview, getting curious about, and
Mhm.
very highly recommended to get trained in whatever you want to facilitate.
Exactly. And it's not, yeah, it's
Absolutely.
wise to get trained in this by somebody that you trust, that you've received some
Absolutely.
sessions from,
Yeah.
that you, nonetheless, I will, and I think it's important too, because I know you're speaking to people who maybe aren't in a breathwork training. And it was one of the things I want to make sure we talk about. There are a few things really simple things that we can do with the breath that can support like spoken word sessions or regular therapeutic types of things. And I think that's valuable, especially for people who maybe don't feel like they've done the breathwork trainings yet, but they'd like some of the gold from that.
Yeah.
Yeah, in this circular breathing, though, that the fact that the frontal cortex is shut off, I just wanted to reiterate that means it's really, really important that we respect the space of the client who's there. We take on a very powerful role next to them. Their lizard, animal, mammal brain is allowed to come alive, and they're allowed to take off the veil of all the social conditioning and take off the social rights and wrongs for a moment so their body can be set free. But that means they're in a very vulnerable position relative to the facilitator. And so to respect that space
There's
is
like the power dynamics that are input in
power
place
dynamics.
immediately. Yeah, completely. Right.
You know, you have a regressed being.
Yeah.
You don't have the adult who came into your room. When that person is breathing, you have a regressed being. You still have an adult, and you're going to, what we want to do oftentimes, our inner child is what comes up in the breath. We want to coach people towards being more adults. And so we can use their breath to release the patterns of the past, but also then train a little more containment for the future.
Yeah. And for coming back.
For healthy containment. I don't like the word regulation because I feel like it lends itself to control rather than the idea of expanding the nervous system to be able to receive and digest more experiences.
Would you put a different word for it rather than regulating?
Yeah, expanding the potential for containment.
All right. We'll find an acronym for that.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know. There probably is one somewhere in one of those books of a bunch of people who've all been, you know, stumbling around about this topic. Yeah.
Again, I'll try and pull this somewhere. You tell me if there's something more you wanted to put in. But you said there are other ways to use breath in groups, and that's again very broad umbrella. But if there's any piece that you want to share about that, obviously it can be something very complex and very needing to get deeply trained in, like circular breathing. And there are certain breaths that might be simpler, easier, also more accessible to people who don't have that, but it's still effective in a group field.
When you mentioned to me that we didn't necessarily have breathwork students here, that's why it came to mind, what could I offer? And you really want to talk about only the group context? Pretty
much. I mean, also, of course, it's inseparable from one-on-one work, of course. And
I'm going to explain something now that I hear you.
Yeah.
Okay. I'm going to tell you what happens for an individual. Then we can extrapolate and move into the group. The one thing that I've noticed, because of course in groups one person might be speaking at any particular time because it's a sharing or something that's happening. And so in here we might be coaching people, or if we have people in dyads, in pairs inside of our group, we might want to invite people to become more connected to their emotional experience. When a person breathes through their mouth versus breathes through their nose, whether or not they're pumping the breath, let's say, but just the act of shifting to mouth breathing has the effect of opening gently the emotional body. So what that means in a group context is if I, as facilitator, want to share an experience where everybody is going to be more emotionally connected, or a dyad where I want people to feel more open to share and feel their emotions, or in a individual person share when I recognize someone is going into thinking and my invitation has been for feeling, that then I can simply invite person to take a few breaths through an open mouth. And I have been surprised and maybe even humbled at times. And I remember the first time I just did it instinctually. And I was like, oh, wow, okay. That's pretty fucking powerful. It's pretty fucking simple, but it's pretty powerful. Some people will argue with the notion of mouth breathing because it is proven to be healthier to breathe through your nose for the filtering of the air, the warmth of the air, the cool of the air. Like if you're in the Nordic regions, please breathe through your nose. It is important to warm the air. If you are in the Nordic regions, you're probably not going to want to be too emotionally connected while it's minus 20 below outside. You might wait till you get to the fire inside. So, but for the purposes of personal growth, transformation, and connection, breathing through the mouth is a key. So just that is a golden nugget that people can take into the most simplest forms of facilitation. Activating or speeding up people's breathing in any way, shape, or form. It doesn't even have to be through the mouth. Sexually, referring to like the sexual energy of arousal, or athletically climbing a mountain, any of this kind of breath that kind of tends to speed us up will activate people. It will also potentially take people away from feeling. Slowing people's breath down or working with slow breathing through the nose or through the mouth will support the cultivation of awareness. It will support calming the nervous system. It will take someone from what I referred to as the red vortex, which we get closer to when we speed up the breath. If you speed up the breath really, 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 really fast for a long, long time, you will blow. Slowing the breath down brings awareness and calms or offers a blue vortex or nourishing parasympathetic nervous system activation. And in the context of a group, of course, if you want a group that's aware, connected, able to see what's going on and feel what's going on, you'll invite, or if somebody's in a trauma state, or the group's in an activated, they're frustrated with each other, and there's a lot of drama, wama in the group, slowing people down with the breath is a tool that can be used. It sounds overly simplified. I understand that. However, it is that. Now, how to artfully do those things so that it seems seamlessly woven into the tapestry of the work you're offering, that may come back around to actually one of your earlier comments that I was kind of like unclear about. But that things like tone, certainly if you're going to speed someone's breath up, if you're going to invite a group to be more alive with their breath and breathe really fast, your voice is probably going to be a little faster, because to invite people to activate their breath when you're really modeling calmness is going to be highly ineffective. And vice versa.
Yeah.
So if I can say anything about tone, it's the tone. You know, I create invitations through my tone. And I model behavior through a tone. But how to do that in a boxy way, I couldn't tell you.
Curious here to, I'll double click here on two more things. If you have anything to add, great. If not, awesome. Breath hold, just like you said, around fast, slow, mouth. Anything around breath holds in particular uses?
I don't use them so much myself. I do more circular breathing these days. I'm quite busy with helping people clear the past.
Got enough to do, huh?
Yeah, no. It's not about that. I'm just saying that that's been a focus. But what I can tell you is the following that I've noticed. The first thing that comes to mind for me is Wim Hof, for example. Yeah, Wim Hof breathing. Or also, if you're familiar with yogic breathing, you've got something that's very akin to Wim Hof, which is Kapalabhati, which is the active, rapid exhales followed by a strong inhale that one might hold. What I sense these breaths do is I think Wim Hof's proven that it stimulates and supports the immune system, for example. Also, it's like whatever. It's like charging a motor or something. It seems like, a battery in your car or a battery in your cell phone. It's like, and it's like containing that charge a little bit. What it doesn't offer though is the release.
Mhm.
And so what I've seen sometimes, if there's a person who's got a lot of, each of us has plenty, but some people are coming to the table with a more hot wired nervous system. There's a lot of swallowed material based on whatever life experience or choices someone has made. If there's a lot of sticky material still remaining, I think this kind of breathing can actually be less beneficial.
Mhm.
I don't want to say damaging because I don't know that, but certainly less beneficial. A more clear system, a more expanded, a nervous system with a greater capacity. I think these types of techniques are healthier there.
Mhm. Yeah.
The tendency to maybe over push also for people who've got a lot of buried material might be there. And so as facilitators, we might, for example, if we're going to have a breath work group or a group go through a Wim Hof or a Kabbalah Bati type experience, because we are looking for an experience where people can kind of center and feel their power in a more contained and way. We want to take the people with the sensitive nervous systems, and we want to make sure that we're taking care of them, not re-traumatizing them, and just offer them the reminder that they can do it softly. It doesn't have to be intense. That and the level of intensity would then
Yeah.
modulate it to
It
support.
actually brought up a piece, maybe answered half of the question I want to ask you here. And this is a resistance to breath. So this I've met both in one-on-one sessions and also in group work. Doesn't work for me. Don't like, there's many ways there's active resistance, passive resistance, and also within the breath work, oftentimes there will be resistances that come from the body or from the mind. So this again is a big question, but just to hear anything to share with beginner facilitators who meet participants that are resistant to breath and they want to support them without pushing them. So it's not a forced act, but still inviting them in some way to be able to benefit from this practice, or ways to support on a mental level what can happen when you meet resistances in a group.
I think the first thing to try to identify is whether it's time to support or challenge the person you're working with. Mm-hmm. Real growth does not happen only through support. Challenge is necessary. I don't know, it's a 50-50. I don't know if many people are resistant to challenge people when they work with people because they've got an idea that their role as a healer is to do it for the other. I often use this metaphor. If you take a butterfly and you cut its cocoon open for it, it will die. It has to break out of the cocoon to develop the muscles and the strength that it needs in order to fly. So actually, by opening its cocoon for it, you kill it. Same is true of human beings. Maybe you won't kill the human, but you kill the force that wants to break out and become a butterfly. So when someone is stable, grounded, centered in themselves, it's time to challenge them. How can you challenge them? You can challenge them with things like, well, if you've never done it before, how about giving it a try? What could it hurt? I understand that you're having the experience or have had the experience of it not working. And here we are in this group process and everybody else is jumping on board. I'm a different facilitator. Maybe you want to give it a try again, or a really rough challenge. Okay, and this is reflective. So let me see how long, it's an example, yeah. How long have your shoulders been that hunched over? Are you happy to leave them that way? I mean, that's a bit of a bitch challenge. this is a Gaia opinion. I know people that agree, but as a healthy, good facilitator, we find artful ways to challenge people, sometimes strongly.
Mhm.
If you have a tendency to challenge people,
Mhm.
your work will actually be to learn when and how to support people.
Mhm.
I know this may have been uncomfortable for you in the past. I'd love to support you to try it again. I understand that maybe nothing happened the last time. I wonder if anybody explained to you the idea that there may be a layer of numbness to work through. These are more supportive. I'm going to be with you the whole way.
Mhm.
If anything feels uncomfortable, we can stop at any time.
Mhm.
That's support. And as a facilitator, the more artful you become, the more you will find yourself dancing between challenge and support with one person back and forth. We call it titrating. We take them closer to what is challenging, and then we bring them into something that is more nourishing, closer to what's challenging. That is something I'm a big fan these days of Andrew Huberman. I don't know if you know his podcast, but he talks about, he does an episode about trauma. And in there, he's a Stanford neuroscientist. He talks about the fact that there's no type of trauma healing technique right now that we know that does not take people closer to the trauma. There's no effective tool that we have. We have to, in
Mhm.
order for resolution of the past to be there, we have to be able to revisit it and meet it in a new way. That's
Mhm.
the opportunity we provide.
Yeah.
Sometimes the person's experience is so challenging that our job is to support it. And sometimes the ego has developed such a defense mechanism that actually our job is to pierce through it with
Mhm.
our intent and with our love, but sometimes a little bit of tough love, which says you never want to force, but
Mhm.
what are the ways that you can meet their resistance with your
Mhm.
resistance? It's effectively,
Yep.
because I give a fuck, I'm going to push a little bit. Nudge. Let's call it nudge. I often use this metaphor to describe this. In my work in training facilitators, I refer to different forms of leadership.
Mhm.
And there's a kind of leadership that's a very natural kind of leadership. I'm not, as a facilitator, I'm not the healer. I'm not the teacher. I'm a friend. Or I'm holding your hand, you could say.
Mhm.
When I'm holding somebody's hand, like you make a skydiving metaphor. If my friend comes to me and they come to my house and they say, I want to go skydiving. And I'm like, oh my God, I've never been either. I want to do it too. I'm so excited to go skydiving. And then I go up into the airplane with my friend. We take the class, we do the thing. We're both up in the airplane together. And my friend's like, I don't want to jump. I don't want to jump. I can't jump. I can't jump. What's my response? I'm like, don't you remember you came to my house? You're the one who started this. I remember you really wanted to jump. I'm going to push you out the airplane because I love you. I'm not really going to push you, but I'm going to see if I can use my words to push you into that place where you told me you wanted to go.
Mhm.
It's not my job to push you because it's my job to heal you. But if you came to me with the intent to go deeper, it's my job to remind you of that.
Mhm.
And if you didn't come with that intent, then that's a challenge that one can offer. So what did you come here for if it wasn't to meet these parts of yourself? And then maybe you find out I came because I just am lonely. Okay, then as a facilitator, I have no business pushing you.
Mhm.
Unless I asked on some kind of intake form, are you ready and willing to fucking do what it takes? Or from whatever it is. And if you came here because you're like hungry for connection and you want a girlfriend or a boyfriend, or, you're like, it's the way to make friends, that can happen in groups. I, as the facilitator, either need to set up a container where that's not welcome, or I need to let those people be resistant.
Yep. And working resistance, entire chapter as well in it. But I just love hearing you I love hearing your rants. I can't help it. It's one of those things that I just get on.
Rants?
Like, well, rants, I don't know what you
I
call
get it. Yeah, it's all good. I love my rants too. It's fine.
it.
Thank you. I love it when I get on my pulpit.
Yeah, and I'm so happy we're doing this. I also realize it's like the end of the night for me. My brain is barely functioning, but I do love listening to you. I'm curious, there were so many little things that I wrote that I want to go into more, but I think we're gonna start to go into more wrapping up. I guess the one part that I don't know if you have an answer for, but I think there are ways to really fuck it up when it comes to guiding breath. And that can be like little things, like, for example, mismatch of tone to the kind of breath you want to invite, something we kind of added in. Or you had a lot of yeses before, so anything that came up on the yes volume for you, but things that you could do that would either confuse or guide in a way that feels unclear. Anything around guiding breath, not necessarily even holotropic
So
breath.
there's a few different things I can come up with, but they're not really so much about as detailed as tone, because that's not actually going to hurt somebody.
And anything that
Letting somebody stay in a highly repetitive emotional state without presencing them in the room is a violation of their well-being.
can you give it like an example of what a presencing would look like or be like? Just to
If
give it.
somebody is in the kind of emotional release where they're in a pattern, like
Mhm.
let's say they're doing this for some long period of time. Yeah. Aaron. I mean, if it's really necessary. Can you hear me? What's your name? Please open your eyes. Sit up. If the person very easily opens their eyes, how old are you? Oh, great. They might say they're 7, then you know where they're at. They might say they're 35, which might be their real age. If they're 7, they have some cognitive awareness of the fact that they can make up a number in the moment. They're very identified with the experience they're in the moment. They're fully regressed if they say a number other than their age. Okay. But if they easily open their eyes and they're easily present to you, I'm simply checking in with you to make sure that you're able to, I don't know, I'm simply making sure that you're okay. I noticed that your body's been in the same pattern for a while, and I was having a hard time inviting you into another pattern. I just need to know you're here in the room. I'm actually, the person kind of flails about, and you're like, okay, is there something in the room that makes you actually feel really comfortable and really safe? What's the most pleasant thing to your eyes right now? That's presencing with support.
Mhm.
I'm supporting them to find something other than me that offers them support in the field. It could be another person, it could be a stuffed animal in the corner, it could be the color of the sky. It doesn't matter to us what it is, it's that we've given them an anchor. So if you, and erring on the side of safety for many people is probably a healthy way to start as a facilitator. There are people that I refer to as intensity junkies. Many people who like to help people are intensity junkies, not all. But intensity junkies will sometimes inadvertently hurt people because their level of capacity to hold the intensity of something might be greater than someone else's. Okay. Other things you can do to confuse the breath work with any kind of interpersonal sexual energy. Breath work is breath work. If horniness or arousal or even an orgasm arises on the mat, that's completely wonderful. What's not wonderful is if the facilitator engages in that energy with the other person.
Or assistant or anyone else who's anyone else.
I call assistants are facilitators. To me, assistants are they're facilitating. They may not be the seasoned facilitator, but they're taking the role of holding some space. So when I use that in the future, let's just know I'm referring to the broad gamut. A a head or a primary facilitator who has assistants may want to say some other specific things they do or don't want in the differential power that the people hold inside the room. But as far as the well-being of the client is concerned, an assistant or a facilitator in a breathwork session that is designed to be a breathwork session ought not to confuse that with a sexual meeting with the other. We talk about mirroring in breathwork. With the eyes open, we might mirror a person's experience of arousal is present. Mirroring a low level arousal that is back and down and not in the face of the other person is safe. Let's call it healthier safe. Now, whether or not a person's capable of doing that is the facilitator's role to know what they're capable of. Because if somebody has kind of, if for example, if I'm feeling really needy and hungry for a connection, and I get some guy or woman on the mat who is kind of sexy, and they go into a sexy thing, it's up to me to either be the hollow bamboo, because I know that actually maybe if I allow that to be seen, that I may not contain myself very well, if that were true for me, then I want to practice hollow bamboo. If I feel like I can healthfully reflect it in a way that isn't connected to the other, it's a beautiful thing to offer, but it takes a certain level of not skill as a facilitator, but a certain level of practice and skill in the frame of sexual work. Okay. How else can you hurt someone? People, this is really basic, but it's really fucking important. It is important to have the right types of tools around to protect people's bodies. If people go into certain types of emotional expression, particularly anger, but lots of types of expressions, it is very possible for them to hurt themselves without realizing it. So if fists are pounding or moving or hips are bouncing, that's around sexual stuff. Somebody can hurt themselves. Please have enough pillows. Please be attentive to where their body is on the mat. I cannot tell you how many times in a training that I've really had to work with somebody to be aware of the physical surroundings of the client. That, and if you're having, as a facilitator, for example, as a main facilitator who has assistants, a great way to get people onboarded into and more comfortable in these types of spaces is to actually ask them to do that. They're attentive. Your job as assistants is to notice what's going on in the different sessions and continue providing pillows and safety so that the facilitator has what they need to protect the client. For example, people have broken hands.
Safety.
Yeah, safety. Physical safety is of utmost importance. Let me think, how else might you? This is subtler, and yet also important and potentially damaging. Anything that's not in this back and down frame can actually have subtle and negative effects. So subtle or gross. Yeah. More subtly, what could happen? Let's say we'll go back to grief for a moment. I'm having an experience where I'm really processing layers and layers of grief around the loss of something. That's where grief usually comes from. It doesn't matter what. And the facilitator is like, it's going to be all right. It's okay. It's going to be all right. This person doesn't know the fact that I'm processing the fact that, I don't know, my mother died in my arms of cancer the other day. And the facilitator is like, it's going to be all right. Well, it's going to be all right, but and all I'm going to do is keep crying because I get the attention I want. When I keep crying, maybe I have a pattern of using grief to get other people's attention. And so when I give them what they want, or rather than just the hollow space, I'm actually supporting a personality trait that is one of manipulation. And it's up to me. And that's, like I said, it's more subtle. But if I react to somebody's anger, somebody's terrified to be angry because they're mother and father abused the living fuck out of. Oops.
So you're back. Yeah.
Yeah, we're back. So if let's say somebody has a history of severe physical abuse,
Mhm.
and because of that, they have for the rest of their lives been nice because they never wanted to do to anyone else what was done to them.
Yeah.
And that person finally has a flash of feeling that they have the potential to be angry in a healthy way, that somebody else has crossed their boundaries, and they're for the first time expressing their anger and they're raging. And I do this. I've repatterned
Yeah.
the inability to, because they get so angry so fast. That's why the first thing is hollow bamboo or backing down. If I react, I repattern some of the old things that were being swallowed. I actually build on it rather than help
Yeah.
resolve it.
Mhm.
So that is something, being reactive in any way,
Mhm.
panicking in any way, making anyone wrong. Like, we're going to be coaching people into particular kinds of breath if they are challenged to find the breath pattern that we're trying to support them to find. It's a very tricky dance of coaching towards without, and some people's personalities will be very delicate around that. You will not do this perfectly, ever,
Ever.
ever. I will never do it perfectly in every case. I have lots of experience and I do it really well, but I will never do it perfectly. And sometimes I do have to step aside of myself and make a correction. And I
Mhm.
can model healthy behavior by acknowledging any correction. So the client actually has permission to also be human. And that's a big meta thing, but it has a strong effect.
Mhm.
So to actually recognize that maybe one had overstepped and not acknowledged it, or, if I've made an error, to not acknowledge it would be also a thing I could do wrong.
Mhm.
If I've made a slight like detour and I came back on track really fast, that's different. But if I've really made a mistake,
Mhm.
I need to acknowledge it.
Mhm.
That goes for all facilitation, but breath work as well.
Yeah. Yeah. I feel like I could have paused you about a million times throughout the talk and made an expansion onto 50,000 different things. So
Yeah, we've done that before, actually.
yeah, yeah, a manual came out of that at the end. But yeah, and I do feel like there's eons more to go into. And yet there's like so many pieces here that I would just want to appreciate you for bringing into life, into words so that we can benefit from it. And it's been really, really, really good. Any,
One of the best ways to learn is through discussion. So if this sparks discussion, I'm sure you guys will learn a lot.
I'm sure we'll spark discussion. I've been good at that for a while now, Gaia. Worries about that. And I just want to say thank you.
You're welcome. You're
Yeah.
very welcome. It's nice to reconnect. It's nice to see you. You look radiant and lovely and empowered.
Yeah, near midnight radiance. That's my night owl abilities. And yeah, and I hope that we get to see each other soon.
I do too. All right, beloved.
Thank
I
you.
will, yeah, have a lovely afternoon. I'm off to do a bunch of stuff with the monkeys around.
Oh yeah.
Ciao, Bella.
Ciao.